China is the problem when it comes to climate change. Put simply, in 16 days, they produce what we do in an entire year. And if we went full greens, well, they would still, of course, be able to cover us nice and easily, and it wouldn't matter what we ultimately did until 2030, because as a developing nation with missile silos, war games with Russia, and 2 Olympics, not to mention a freaking space station, Paris doesn't apply to them till 2030, which means they can keep polluting sky high. They can double every single year for the next 9 years. It's a point the Prime Minister made today, and I think it's completely fair. And John Roskam is the man who's in charge of the IPA. He joins us now to talk about this because there is apparently some blowback today on the Prime Minister for suggesting that China is a bigger climate problem than Australia, mate.
It's unbelievable, Paul, isn't it? And it's exactly as you said. The Institute of Public Affairs did the calculations, and China in 16 days emits as much CO2 as Australia does in a year. And there's another point that you just highlighted, Paul, which is even if we went to net zero somehow, that would cost, on our calculations, 653,000 jobs. And they're not jobs in the city where people can walk across the street and get another job there, jobs in regional Australia, rural and country towns. And the Prime Minister is absolutely right to point out what is staring everyone in the face.
Well, also, let's be straight up here, right? And there'll be people that will disagree, but that's fine, okay? I'm not going to ever stand back from how I believe, right? You can't have billions of people on the planet, multiple industrial revolutions, without obviously something happening to a climate that didn't have people in it at one point in time. It's fairly obvious, right? So I don't doubt the existence of climate change. My conversation is always about the cost of transition and the consequences of what the consequences of the most radical policies would be. That's why it's not an even playing field. That's why I get so annoyed that they set prams on fire out the front of Parliament House. When they go to court the next day, they talk about the deaths of billions of people, but they don't have the balls to go down the street, round the corner, and actually stand in front of the Chinese embassy and burn a pram.
Paul, that's right. And if we're talking about a level playing field, let's talk about what the Europeans do. The Greens are arguing we should follow the lead of the Europeans. Well, that's fine. 60% of France's electricity comes from nuclear power. In Britain, the figure is about 20%. The Greens and the left are not interested in a level playing field. They're not interested in Australian jobs. There's absolutely no recognition that under the Paris Convention, Australia's cuts to emissions are deeper per capita than America, than the Europeans, of course, much deeper than the Chinese. There's no recognition that we have substantially cut our CO2 emissions since 2005, far more than the Europeans, far more than the Americans, and of course, far more than people who the Greens like to compare us to, the New Zealanders.
Yeah, correct, which, by the way, never gets mentioned about how bad their vaccine rollout is, by the way, much worse than ours right now. But, of course, Queen Ardern, no mistakes. But also, here's the other thing, just the practical, logical thing, right? That Kyoto, there was all the fight about whether it was signed or not. Rudd signs it. By 2020, we meet that target. It's 2021 right now, and there's 9 years before our next commitment, which is 2030, and we'll match that as well. But no, now the debate's about what our 2050 target's going to be. Now, that to me seems to be cart before the horse. We've already done a deal and matched 20. We will match 30. So the idea that an Australian government in 21 needs to set policy for 2047, 48, 49 and 50 is pretty ridiculous.
Well, it is ridiculous, and it highlights, Paul, that more is never enough for the left. It's exactly as you said, every commitment that Australia has made, and Australia's made deeper, bigger commitments to cut emissions than, as I said, the Europeans or the Americans, we have met. But there is never recognition of this. You give the Greens a hand and they want an arm. It is never enough. And of course, that's the mode of operations of the Greens and the left. Whatever you do, it is never enough until you completely deindustrialise, you can go completely vegan, and we go back to wood-fired heaters.
Yeah, correct. And what about today as well? We learned that there is going to be an even greater push to make sure that we can change the minds of future Australians, where kids in kindy, now by this I am talking about basically very close to, preschool here, are being that kids will be taught about the dangers of climate change. So the very basics, when the ABCs are being told to them, they will be told, of course, that the overall story is one of climate catastrophe, which of course means that's the mix that will lead into their worldview and then eventually their voting patterns, right?
Absolutely. And more than that, it leads to a climate of fear. It doesn't teach young people optimism. I don't think the Dandenong Council here in Melbourne is going to be teaching both sides of the climate change debate. They're going to be indoctrinating or attempting to 2- and 3-year-olds. This is not the way to progress. Climate change is in every year level of the national curriculum right now. It's in phys ed, it's in English, it's in mathematics. Now you have extremists wanting to indoctrinate 2- and 3-year-olds. It's another example of enough is never enough.
Yeah, it is crazy. John, so good to talk to you, mate. Really appreciate it. All the best to the IPA. If you support freedom, get a membership and support John and the team. Thank you, mate.